Welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navik.co. This episode is brought to you by Nefta. Nefta has created an advertising network that pays game publishers higher eCPMs on their iOS opt-out users and drives better results for advertisers. This works by delivering their campaigns to more receptive and relevant audiences using first-party data and behavioral analytics on an app-by-app basis. A simple two-step integration enables them to drive superior results for advertisers while increasing ARPDAU for publishers in a 100% privacy-compliant way. You can learn more about how Nefta can boost your results at nefta.io. Now, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Niko Vuori. We have a great episode for you today, and one I am particularly excited for. Last year's most popular Navik podcast episode was with today's guest, and we were covering the topic of Yuga Labs and their then newly released game, Dookie Dash. Today, we go back to the future for a bit of deja vu, and once again, we'll be talking about Yuga, one of the heavyweights, of course, in the Web3 space, with Bored Ape Yacht Club, among many other top crypto-native intellectual properties. And Yuga, in partnership with Faraway Games, is going to release with their Dookie Dash toilet-themed Infinite Runner sequel called Dookie Dash Unclogged. And there are a lot of animations from the original, the most important which are that it is not token-gated and it is mobile. And in conjunction with this release, Yuga and Faraway have announced that Faraway Games is acquiring a subset of Yuga's IP portfolio. So we have a lot of news to cover here. So today, we welcome back Spencer Tucker, who, as Chief Gaming Officer at Yuga, led the development of the title and partnered with Faraway Games on it. Spencer also has some personal news to share, as he is transitioning from Yuga to become Chief Product Officer at Faraway. But he will remain closely involved in continuing to develop new IP with Yuga. A lot going on, a lot to unpack. So without further ado, Spencer, welcome back to the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. And yeah, awesome. Definitely a lot to cover. Yeah,
This is a meaty episode here. A lot of news being covered here. So we always start with this. I know you've been on the pod before, but just remind our listeners about your background. And of course, share the story, the exciting personal news about joining Faraway.
Yeah, so just brief kind of history on myself. I've been in gaming for roughly 20 years. Before that, I was in banking, doing bank ops for about 8 years-ish. So previously worked at Scopely as president of games. Before that, I was at Agree as SVP of product there and SVP of studios at Glue. And then before that, I was in the kind of PC MMO scene, running a bunch of mid-core games and business ops for area games. And most recently, I forgot I should mention, CGO at Yuga Labs. And now, as of last week, just transitioned over to Faraway and kind of brought, I guess you could say that the kids with me. So I brought a number of IPs and different game experiences over to Faraway. And of course, the relationship there is pretty tight, as you might imagine. We're still making Dookie Dash, and we're still working directly with the folks over there and the founders to kind of integrate some of the brands that we picked up and some of their properties, and the whole interoperability sort of ecosystem play lives on in that sense.
Nice. Our listeners, I'm sure, are mostly familiar with Yuga Labs and Bored Ape and Mutant Apes, and CryptoPunks, of course, was acquired by them as well. A lot of crypto native IP, like I mentioned in the intro. But our listeners are perhaps not as familiar with Faraway Games. So tell us a bit more about them. When I got to know Alex Paley, who's the founder there, this was back in 2021, they were still very focused on building a Solana native open world shooter called Mini Royale, which had, of course, NFT integrations and open economies. But it looks like a lot has changed in the subsequent years in Faraway's strategy and what they're working on. How has the company evolved over the years, and what are they doing now?
Yeah, so I think originally the vision was, lightweight mobile, easy, accessible games that you could launch up with interoperability and kind of a crypto native sort of component to it. That's still a thing. However, the company's evolved quite a bit. So now it's focused on its platform strategy. Almost think of it as B2B, B2C, D2C, sort of like a SaaS sort of solution for crypto economies, crypto games with a marketplace, non-custodial wallet solutions to onboard, non-Web3 native folks much easier. They've also been focused on building additional games. Some of those are what I'd refer to as like kind of degen first games or like Web3 NFT gated experiences, but also looking to grow the ecosystem with more kind of let's call it like free to play Web 2.5 types of experiences. And so the real kind of strategy there is still to focus on games first, but to build out an ecosystem and a platform that really creates a sort of sticky inflow from more traditional gaming and gets people sort of onboarded to the kind of value proposition and sort of retentive features that are only available through the blockchain. So that's kind of the focus right now.
Nice. And how does the Yuga partnership with Faraway come into play here? Like, how does that fit into the strategy? And if you can actually tell us a little bit about the background on how the original deal came to be and how it evolved, and what does it mean for you guys now going forward?
Yeah, happy to speak about that. So I think to appreciate that, you got to go back a little bit pre-Faraway at Yuga Labs. So as Chief Gaming Officer at Yuga Labs, we did a whole bunch of what I'd call mini games activations, generally very short sort of dev timelines, and typically not being built with developers who had a lot of robust experience in either free to play or at scale product or games as a service sort of experiences. And one of the challenges there, aside from the short dev timelines, were just kind of the number of features you could get out, the types of experiences you could build, and kind of dealing with like bugs and sort of like scale problems and things like that as a byproduct of sort of the development ecosystem that you were leveraging. Because Yuga at the end of the day is just not a first party developer and never really was. So after we put out a few of these games, it became very clear to me that we needed to start to partner with other developers who had a little bit more experience, bandwidth, moved fast, which is kind of critical in Web3, but built stuff that could stand up at scale and had experience live operating product. There are obviously a lot of developers out there. There aren't a ton of developers that build at the pace that kind of accommodates, Web3, and that was one of the considerations. So, given my prior experience with Alex and Dennis, both at Glue and also worked with them at Scopely, I had a pretty tight relationship with them as a byproduct of that. I reached out and I said, hey, would you guys be interested in sort of building out some products with Yuga? I helped tee them up with the Mutant Cartel guys for Serum City. And so we already had like a kind of ongoing conversation. And we had this idea at Yuga to kind of grow the ecosystem. I kind of talked about that, I think, last time with Dookie Dash. So really this idea of Dookie Dash Unclogged kind of came up. It was like, well, what if we, open the front of the funnel, no longer token gate it, try to create a reward mechanism to kind of simulate the original zeitgeist and sort of like driving factor behind what I saw as like kind of best in class KPI profiles for a game like that. And then built it, for scale, mobile first, new engine, etc. So they were into that. They thought the idea was great. And that's kind of how it all kicked off. We've been developing that for, call it, I think 7 months now, something like that. And it's a brand new engine, lots of changes. We can get into some of that stuff and how the strategy's changed a bit, but that was sort of the genesis point. And then from there, as they continued to kind of iterate and create this game, Yuga was looking at the product and kind of the quality of the output and was pretty impressed with it. And they were like, these guys are basically delivering a great product at a great pace. And and we've got all these other games that we don't really have the capacity or attention span or focused energy to really go deep into. Maybe it makes sense to have a conversation when Faraway reached out to Yuga and said, hey, we're interested in some of these IPs. Maybe it makes sense to pursue, exploring that route. And so that's what ended up happening. As a byproduct of that, Faraway picked up Legends of the Mora and Heavy Metal. They're still attached, in the typical Web3 way through interoperability to the Yuga ecosystem. But now they're like dedicated sort of Faraway IPs and are getting the love and attention of a dedicated, developer who actually has like the capacity to build for those communities. So that's kind of the genesis of both the IP, the games, and then my sort of factoring into that is part of the conversation when we explored IP going over to Faraway. And they were already making the game, and I was spending, the majority of my time working on these products anyway. It was like, does it make sense? Alex and Dennis were like, Spencer really knows this stuff better than anybody else. What do you guys think about maybe he coming over and joining Faraway? And so we had a back and forth about that with Yuga, but I think we all generally arrived at the conclusion that made the most sense. And so I was happy to be able to join them officially and still continue the work that I was doing at Yuga, and again, keeping the relationship strong between Yuga and Faraway as a result of that. So it's that's the change and the move for me, but ultimately it's empowering for those IPs and those communities to be able to have a dedicated person who understands the brands and understands product, focused with those guys to kind of put all those resources behind delivering great, excellent, kind of sticky experiences for those collections.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot has happened, as we say, and things move fast in Web3, and you blink and you miss it. Like I said, I was looking at the Faraway website and preparing for this episode, and I just remembered Alex and Dennis working on Mini Royale back in not that long ago, only a couple of years ago, and here we are. The website looks completely different, and so yeah, blink and you miss it. So in addition to some of the IP coming over, and obviously that frees up Faraway to build as they see fit, I presume, with that IP, and then tying it back to Yuga. Are there still plans to do more of kind of co-development or taking other Yuga IP, like the biggest of the big IP, like the Bored Apes and like you did with Dookie Dash, and continuing to do more of those games as well? Or is this, the Dookie Dash Unclogged, is this now done there, and then Faraway's planning on working on the new IP exclusively? Or is there some mix of things?
Yeah, I think it's definitely kind of a mix of a number of things. So obviously Dookie Dash Unclogged is Bored Ape IP, and that's going to be developed with Faraway and launched and operated with Faraway. The heavy metal stuff and Legends of the Mora. Think of like Legends of the Mora as kind of an analog to Star Wars Legends. So it's like you've got Other Side as the main brand, and a Star Wars story is like some offshoot stories on top of that brand. Legends of the Mora is kind of the same deal. So the degree to which we continue to work together and kind of realize sort of that universe collectively, like that will be a thing. But I think, for Yuga and Faraway, like the relationship will continue to evolve, and we'll see, what we do in the future, collaboratively together with different brands. But I can say from Faraway's point of view, we definitely want to lean into those IPs as kind of a prime priority, and deliver experiences that people are really looking for. And I can get into what that looks like. I mean, there's really kind of like, we have a pretty unique, I think, business strategy at this point, which is what I describe as like first and second party, like game publishing and ecosystem plays, plus a kind of split focus, what I call degen first games, and let's call it Web 2.5 front funnel games. And so the idea there is first we built this platform, and I actually think probably most people out there don't even know this stuff exists. If they go to Faraway's website and check it out, I think you'll be pretty surprised at the tech that already exists there, like the non-custodial wallets, multi-chain support. There's like fiat payment options, crypto payment options, like interoperability in games, a game marketplace where it shows you, it queues up off-chain data on that marketplace to show you like, hey, you own this like NFT and it's interoperable in these various different places. There's a UGC layer that's already built, that's already live and working in Dookie Dash Unclogged and Mini Royale Nations and some of the other products. There's a lot there from just a pure like SaaS business platform perspective, as well as like a consumer marketplace perspective. So I think that's definitely something interesting. But as we look at the degen to free to play, I guess you could call it Web 2.5 gaming. Really, the idea is the free to play stuff is going to be targeting mobile, because that's where scale is. Like mobile, cross platform, honestly, mobile and PC. All our games are going to be cross platform in that respect. But what you can do with those games, as you might expect, is like more limited than what you can do if it's a degen first game. And so the degen first games will do things like you would expect a degen first game to kind of do, like look at individual traits, work those into the gameplay, look at kind of the reward systems and make sure those are aligned with what people expect out of a Web3 gaming experience. Really lean into this kind of interoperability play in a way that kind of really speaks to the Web3 crowd directly. But at the same time, those pieces of content will still be useful in the free-to-play kind of Web 2.5 play. And so I'll give you like a real practical example of this. In Dookie Dash Unclogged, you've got NFT sort of benefits in the form of this thing called Yuga score. And so you've got a sewer rank. So if you remember Dookie Dash 1, you had like different tiers. You had tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. That mechanic still exists, but in the free-to-play version of the game, you can earn your way from tier 0 effectively to the top tier, which we call GOAT tier, and you get the same benefits you would if you had owned, a Bored Ape at the time in Dookie Dash 1. So same kind of concept. Now there's two ways to unlock that kind of tier. The first way is to basically play your way all the way up, earn stars every run until you unlock each of those tiers progressively. The other way is you own these NFTs, you hold them in your wallet, and when you connect, it gives you a thing called Yuga score, and that Yuga score then automatically unlocks those tiers. So it's like a bypass for the grind, in essence. So that's kind of like meeting the criteria of Apple and Google in terms of you're not giving sort of benefits or advantages that can't be earned or bought directly in the game. But it's still giving utility to those NFT collections. And that's something that I think, is pretty interesting. So if you think about it that way, it's now you've got this free to play funnel that we can leverage to grow the ecosystem. We can then find conversion points within that ecosystem through various different things to get more people into Web3 and vice versa. Because there might be some Web3 players who also want to play, Dookie Dash, even though it's not completely degen first. So that's kind of the idea. And then on top of that, we have first and second party sort of gaming sort of development things going on. So I can't get into too many details, but suffice to say we're either deeply in conversations with or co-developing sort of outside of the Faraway ecosystem on a number of games. So like we want to lean into the strengths of Faraway, both from a game genre standpoint and execution standpoint, but also from a knowing where we're weak and kind of leveraging, those strengths in other parties outside of us. So we're in conversations with some pretty large developers that I'm sure people have seen some interestingly high fidelity products, or developers in the kind of more traditional free-to-play mobile space that do genres that we're, just not prepared to kind of develop in. So I think you'll see a number of those things coming out. And again, back to the ethos of interoperability, all of these things are going to fall into one of those two categories I just described, even if they're external. And all of those things are going to interoperate with each other. And so all of those collections that we're working with are essentially going to be given utility in these experiences. And we're going to be looking at ways to kind of convert folks from each of those experiences into our ecosystem. And we're supplying the technology and all those things I mentioned before at a platform level, like the kind of non-custodial wallets, easy onboarding, marketplace with like all that off-chain data represented for players, a trade ecosystem, like all that, that people then get to not just trade within a game, but trade outside of games, like basically sell content from one game to a person who uses it in another game, that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty interesting play, but that's kind of how the strategy is evolving and manifesting at the moment.
So that's very meaty, very, very meaty, and lots to unpack there. I did have a question that came to mind as you were talking about all the different initiatives that Faraway's engaging in, the SaaS products and the Web3 degen stuff, and then free casual mobile, everything in between, first party development, second party development. Like there's a lot going on there, right? Mm-hmm. And I did have a question on the genres because even before you got into that, it's very rare for a developer to have expertise in multiple genres. Very, very rare. Typically, you'll find studios focus on a single genre, and they'll just basically make that their entire careers and focus on that. So, Infinite Runner and open world shooter already are very different, and you've just mentioned that there are a whole bunch of other genres that are in the mix. Yes, you mentioned some of the second party stuff where you're co-developing with studios that have that expertise, but mm-hmm. I mean all of this, and then the SaaS stuff that's all very different too. Like selling B2B is not the same as developing your own IP, and it's not the same as co-developing with other people's IP. So all that to say, wildly ambitious, and I love ambitious projects and companies and guests. So I love that from that perspective. But it does beg the question, is it too much? Mm-hmm. How are you able to work, even with open world shooter and Dookie Dash, the Infinite Runner? Like, how is their expertise internally to do just those two, never mind all the others?
Yeah. So I think few things I'll point out. First thing is with respect to like the platform stuff, there's dedicated teams on each product, and the platform team is no exception. So that's kind of like a single lane. It's not a shared resource pool, and its entire kind of like skill set is around building out that platform tech, that like SaaS stuff, the marketplace stuff. Second thing is that in certain cases, some of this is like not necessarily being built from scratch. And I think like that's where a lot of the challenges in game dev can be. Building from 0 to 1 is difficult. If you've got a starting position and emulation targets, it tends to be easier. And then you also have to look at like what you're building and who it's for. So I'll give you like 2 examples. Mini Royale Nations, I'm pretty sure that was like a code base that pre-existed and was acquired when Faraway kind of started, and then they built on top of it. So it wasn't like they built a shooter from the ground up from scratch. It was like something that already pre-existed, and then they just built on top of it and added a ton of meta depth and kind of different layers. Similarly with Dookie Dash, we did that at Yuga. The code is brand new from scratch, but one of the hardest things you can do with like a casual game is get that core loop right, and that initial experience. And a lot of that work was both done already and proven out at some degree of like meaningful, quantifiable scale with the community in Dookie Dash 1. And so what we did was took Dookie Dash core concept, added, what you would refer in the industry as like a +1, right? So it's like we added like the magnet and the slowdown timer and some of the stuff I actually want to get into the original. And then we started adding in additional layers that actually were very synergistic with stuff that Faraway already had. So the UGC stuff, for example, already existed. The fact that we were building in a new engine and the fact that that platform tech already worked, and we already had skeletons and rigs and kind of specs for those avatars and vehicles and stickers and everything, made it like super easy to plug it in. And all of a sudden now you've got a UGC layer on top of Dookie Dash. So it's not like you have to iterate, your way to that point. It's like you're borrowing from stuff you did historically and just adding it on top. There is a lot new going into Dookie Dash as well. And that's obviously iterative work. I think other genres, for example, Serum City, was also built on the back of an acquired game that they have. I think it's like Faraway. I forget the name of it, but it's on the website. It was like a city builder. It was more of a 3D one, and so they moved to 2D, did the art, but the kind of like core game code base and sort of like format are pretty similar. It's basically a township-like game. And then when it comes to, Legends of the Mara, there's like the free-to-play version, which we're still iterating on. And then there's the kind of rebirth, which will be a re-envisioning of the current game, like added a whole bunch of technical depth, etc. But we, again, have the code bases. We've already sort of imported those, stood them up on staging, and now we're talking about adding health mechanics and like a combat layer and stuff like that. Again, a separate dedicated team. So I think it is true that is a lot, and it is very ambitious. And I have no doubt that the strategy will continue to evolve as we go. But I think the core thesis here is to build on top of what you already have, leverage tech that's already been executed and kind of put live and battle test it, and then acquire either the expertise or the technology to kind of give you a leg up on the next sort of game that you make. And then there's one other factor that I think is actually kind of important to mention, which is the reality that, like, if we're going to do a free-to-play game, you have to be competitive with a free-to-play market, even if it's Web 2.5. That is an incredibly high bar to crest, very difficult. If you're competing with a DGen game, the kind of game quality bar is much different, and you're not over optimizing the way you might have to do in free-to-play. It's not about like min-maxing your UA, CPI, like CAC and kind of LTV ROI sort of yield stuff. I mean, that will be a factor, I'm sure, at some point, but right now that's not really the case because you've got that baked-in audience. And so what you really want to do there, and I think what we're doing is, like, you ask yourself the question of, like, what is the purpose of this game? How are we monetizing it? Like, what actually is the strategy for this? And then that in relationship with the kind of Web 2.5 funnel play, kind of create this ecosystem play where it's what I'd call like collateralized LTV and UA. So it's like more of like your network function, sort of allowing you to grow and then be a force multiplier on that yield and that CAC, so that you can more effectively spend your way to kind of that scale. So I think it's a balance, but the reality is, like, the DGen games don't have to be, the most AAA of AAA games, and they don't have to be competitive with,
Monopoly
Clash
Go,
of Clans or Monopoly Go, exactly. And so I think, like, that's one of the benefits. And even with the free to play stuff, if you look at Dookie Dash, the play there is like pretty novel in a lot of respects. For that reason, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend that, like, we're going to go smash Subway Surfers tomorrow just because we built an infinite runner, right? That's a silly thing to kind of assume. But, and it's also true that, like, in the aggregate sense, I don't think a lot of people know what Bored Ape is or Dookie Dash in general, right? There's a certain crowd, absolutely. And I think we already have their attention. So the UA from that crowd is, like, baked in effectively, and it's free. But how do you reach a broader audience? And so that's some of the stuff we're working on now, like adding arcade mode, with the esport layer, with the prize pool that grows over the course of the season, with a pretty, like, big starting number, $1 million, with kind of like our leveraging our relationships with different apes that have, like, other relationships, in media and kind of like with other large like merchandise sort of product-based brands, etc. So there's like a whole bunch going on there that's not even just the game. It's like it is leveraging sort of the capacities of both companies to drive that product to success. And so that's, like, yet again, the name of the game never changes. You're looking for some sort of disruptive advantage. And here I think, it depends on the game and the advantage, but ultimately, the more that we can kind of tie these all together, hence interoperability, et cetera, the more de-risked any one of these things becomes. So that's kind of the play there.
Yeah, I mean, all makes sense. Again, wildly ambitious, as I mentioned before. I have to ask this question. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this. But as far as I could tell, the last publicly announced funding round for Faraway was in 2021, which was $21 million. A lot of this stuff that you're describing is again ambitious, takes time, it's expensive. I believe there's an unannounced funding round in 2023. Are you able to share any more on that? Because this stuff doesn't come free. It's not cheap to build.
I cannot really get into like specific numbers, but what I can say is we're well positioned to be able to execute what we need to execute, and to the extent that we want to pick up more stuff or kind of like need the extra runway, we'll of course keep our option space open, but we're in a pretty solid spot right now, and we're very fiscally responsible. I think that's like one thing that I really appreciate about Faraway and those guys in particular is just how buttoned up they are in terms of cost optimization. And like
you're not hiring Taylor Swift for your all hands. Come on,
absolutely not. Yeah. It's treat it the way you should treat a startup, right? But like lean in where you think you've got like the most confidence in the upside.
Got it. All right. That was a very diplomatic answer. I had to get it in there, and I figured this would be the response. But yeah. Well, thanks for at least for giving the "we're well positioned" line there. So that's at least some confirmation there. Okay. So I do want to get into some specifics here. We are talking Dookie Dash. We're comparing it to the original. You've kind of touched on a few of the pieces here already, but I really do want to go in on that because last year we were talking about growing the audience. It sounds like that's what you're really leaning into now. Obviously, the original Dookie Dash was extremely degen, like it was token gated, and Bored Apes are not cheap. So, you needed to have a very expensive NFT in order to just even play the game. Obviously, couldn't be mobile, couldn't even be in the Epic Store at that time, or Steam, certainly. So it was browser-based game, which of course has its limitations. So tell me, from that starting point, obviously you've got a totally new code base, and it's mobile now. Talk more about the differences between what you learned about a token-gated, very degen Web3, truly Web3 experience to where you are now, which is, as far as anybody who doesn't know about Bored Apes is concerned, it's just a free-to-play infinite runner, right? With some then rewards at the end for NFT holders. So a very different experience, despite being the same genre, infinite runner. Talk us more about all the changes that you made and all the things that you learned from the original coming into this one.
Yep. So learned quite a bit, which is also why we made a lot of changes. So I think first and foremost, the first learning is when you token gate something, that the ecosystem is interesting. And by that, I mean the Web3 ecosystem, the audience is interesting. It's not what I think most people would expect. So you look at like wallet count, there's no way to kind of like anchor back to a definite, single player, if that makes sense. So it's like, I could have 20 wallets, right? And I count as like 20 different people. But you really get an appreciation for the total sort of size of the player base or potential player base when you do something that's like token gated on a single token basis. And the reality is like, looking at that, we're talking about like 30,000 people, 40,000 people max, right? So yeah, very disproportionate in terms of behavior from a spend and kind of retention perspective, but also very small. And so you've effectively capped out, because I think arguably Dookie Dash is probably one of the most successful Web3 games in the last couple years. And I think it achieved its maximum potential pretty quickly. And I don't think it would have sustained, over a longer period of time as a SaaS game, because there's just no front funnel. There's the tokens, the gate, there's the motivation that's like short-lived. And then the reality is there's not a mechanism for scale. So what I learned was a couple things. Like one, that play again is reliant on kind of current market dynamics and hype to kind of carry it. And it's probably capped out at, whatever that percentage of the total audience that's participating in the NFT ecosystem at the time ultimately is. The second thing I learned was that, if you're going to build like a game that's more open, you need to carry over that same motivation. And there is a relationship between the token gating and the kind of mechanism for motivation. In this case, the sewer pass evolving to a heavy and kind of rank, based on your rank, etc. You have to find some way to simulate that at scale, right? And that's difficult to do. And I think we spent a lot of time thinking about that in particular, like, because I'm not, naive enough to believe that the game itself is going to be hugely successful as a free-to-play Web 2 game just because it's a toilet humor infinite runner. And so you look for like, what are the things you can do to give yourself as close to the kind of prior success factors as possible, but at a scale that's much different, like orders of magnitude greater. And I think like that's what started us down that process of electing what we're going to change about the game. So I really started with like, what is the motivation? We already had the mechanic, and we knew that the mechanic would work if the motivation was there and it was clear enough. And then you also have to ask yourself another question, another layer of complexity, which is, how is this going to be promoted by the people who played the first game if it is not token gated and it's, like not the same sort of like narrative from a Web3 point of view. And so you add on top of that, what can you do? Because you want to get the scale, you have to be on Apple and Google. So you're limited in terms of some of the things people would normally expect, like a huge power advantage or whatever, because they own an NFT. You can't do that. And you also can't do that because of the type of game it is, skill-based, game. So took all those factors into account and thought about, what is the actual, like, I guess, season plan, live service plan, SaaS, or not SaaS, kind of like esports sort of approach that we want to take to kind of emulate the success of the last game and motivate people to behave the way they did before. Where we landed was, with respect to checking the box of giving utility to the old collections, such that they still feel like they want to, one, participate, but two, are going to be a mouthpiece and sort of elevate that brand through social media. We added in that token utility. I mentioned the sewer pass stuff. So that was one component, was like figuring out the analog to the tiers that we had before, and then tying that in a way that wouldn't be problematic for Apple and Google, but still like beneficial for those who originally, supported the game and kind of like got the word out. Second thing we did was we looked at the format for the season. So the season's going to run for 3 months. And the way it's structured is you're competing on a weekly basis and then on a seasonal basis for the opportunity to win these things called the golden plungers. And the golden plungers are going to be NFTs. And so like the way that works is, on a weekly basis, and there's actually some interesting like esport nuance here if you want me to get into it. But the golden plungers are going to compete weekly for a chance to win these things. And then if you are at the top of the leaderboard at the end of the season, you're guaranteed one. So the ones that are on the weekly basis are a little more RNG. So you basically, the higher your score on the leaderboard, the more opportunities you have to successfully pull one of these out of those boxes that you win off the leaderboard. But everyone effectively has a shot at getting one of these, even if you're at the bottom of the leaderboard, you only get one box. So it's more of a, like, quantity and like kind of probability that you're competing for in that sense. But if you are just crushing it, you still have a chance to win at the season, the top whatever number of places, TBD, the exact number. So these golden plungers will be minted, and you could keep them, sell them, whatever, trade them around. But those things are basically tickets, access passes. And that's how you get into the esport tournament. And the esport tournament it's fixed to the number of people who have those passes, and that's where that prize pool is ultimately going to be rewarded. So on a weekly basis, you're competing for these tickets to compete in the esport tourney, and over the course of that season, the prize pool grows. It starts at $1 million, and so by the time the season ends, it will be over $1 million, TBD how much, and you'll be in a position to compete for those prizes. And then in the actual tournament, it's very similar in terms of format. So you will compete based on your rank. You'll get these points, and you'll be able to flip over tiles or open a chest, TBD on the actual mechanic. But each one of those will have, a prize below it. And those prizes can range in amounts, between whatever. It could be as small as maybe $500 all the way up to like $100,000, maybe even more. We'll see. And the idea there is, once again, if you're at the top of the leaderboard, you're not taking the whole pie and kind of everyone else is losing out. You're getting more shots at different chunks of the pie, and you might still take the whole pie. But somebody who only gets one, shot might still win something pretty material and disproportionate to their rank. And so that's how you keep the motivation really strong to participate in that competition. And then, of course, it wouldn't be, Dookie Dash without the key. And so at the top of the leaderboard, there will also be, in addition to, say, those number of chances you get to take rewards with, a key of sorts. And that key is going to be a very deal no deal type scenario. So it'll be like, you can keep it, you can open a chest with it, you can sell it. What's in the chest? I don't know. Could be anything. Is it a car? Is it a ape coin? Like, who knows? TBD. But that's another kind of degen mechanic at play there. And so that's the format, and that's the motivation factor to try and emulate the kind of first game. And of course, we'll evolve this over seasons, and I'm sure it will change. But for season one, that's what it's going to look like. Now, you add on top of that the UGC component, the fact that the people who create the UGC literally take 90% of their content that they sell if they're selling it on their storefront. And there's an Amazon style referral program too, with like links. And so there's ways for people to monetize, even, collecting a bunch of content and kind of creating these little collections for use in Dookie Dash, et cetera. And then on top of that, you've got these social mechanics where you can watch people's runs, look at the top score, you see their avatar. We're, doing stuff with like esports streamers already. And you can kind of imagine where the vision for this ultimately goes. So it is a much bigger game, both from a feature perspective, but also from a technology perspective than the first one. But ultimately that's the play. And I think that's what's required to make this sort of successful. So like right now we're in, I guess you could call it sort of like a beta of sorts in the Philippines. We just opened up Australia. We're really just right now trying to make sure that the tech's stable, and getting a sense of like sort of like UA costs, et cetera, trying out different creative and standing up sort of the various sort of ad algorithms that are going to be required at scale. We're going to continue to iterate there, and once we're happy with the KPI profile, we'll open up additional geos and kind of eventually we'll launch. Right now we're aiming for, I think, July, probably. But the reality is, as well as I do, like game dev is like, you don't want to just rush something out to rush it out to hit a date. Like this is not about like hitting dates. This is about delivering something that's going to be disruptive. And that's exactly what we're aiming to do. So that's where it's at the moment.
All right. As you were talking, I scribbled down all the words that you are tacking on, or not tacking on, but baking into this game. You have social, you have esports, you have streamers, you've got UGC layer, you've got mobile, you've got Web3, you got Web 2.5, you've got free to play, you've got degens, you got NFTs. And I think I missed a few because I only started taking these down about halfway through.
This is also cross-platform.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm going to write that down too. Cross-platform. Yeah. So, for an infinite runner, which is typically the most casual of casual, certainly free to play, genres like Subway Surfers is just, it's so hyper casual. This is a lot, right? And so what's the thesis here around, like, I get the motivation. The motivation is money. Yep. You could have led with that. Money is the motivation. Always a good motivation. Works every time. But why Infinite Runner? Were you kind of almost forced into that because of the original Dookie Dash, or I have to believe there are other genres of games that are better suited to, well, maybe not. Maybe I'll let you speak to this. Actually, I won't presume anything, and I'll let you just kind of speak to that. So why Infinite Runner, and then why so many different layers of complexity, arguably, which makes it harder for you guys, right? Like it makes it more interesting potentially for the player, but it makes it really hard for the developer to balance all of those different components.
Yeah. Happy to answer that. So the easy short answer to why Infinite Runner is, one, It's what we had that we'd already proven worked once. And I didn't want to, do something untested before. Like if you have something that's kind of already proven to work in an esports capacity, even though it's novel, right? Like an infinite runner esport game is a pretty novel thing.
Yeah.
But it is skill based. And like there's a number of things you have to have skill be a factor if you're doing real money rewards. That's one thing. Second thing is we'd already tested this out with the target audience, even unintentionally as that was, esport players came in, Mongrel won. So we know that there's a demand for it. We also had other esport players like Sway and others playing this at France and Dubai and whatever, and the feedback's been generally like consistently very positive. So I think for me it was a don't fix what's not broken. We'd proven this out. I think it did. There are things that we found in beta that I think are interesting and that we've been focused on. Like for example, without that motivation, it's just an infinite runner, and like people don't understand like what they're competing for, and so their tolerance for friction or lack of a fatui or whatever is like quite low. So hence we added all that stuff in, and an arcade mode for the more casual players to have objective based things to do versus just competitive mode. So we have both. But that was kind of the idea there. It was like, I don't want to do something that we've never done before because I just don't know how it's going to work. And if it's like not an infinite runner, is it going to be scalable? Is it going to require all this like net code? Like shooters are a can of worms. Like didn't want to go that path, So it was just kind of like it was the right mix, I think. And with respect to all the other crazy stuff that got layered on top of it, I mean, really, honestly, it goes back to that point I was making before. Is there a way to leverage the stuff that already exists in interesting ways to improve the experience? And again, de-risk, various different factors like maybe LTV or, whatever. And the answer is yes, there was stuff we could do. And UGC layer actually didn't take that much effort. It was pretty plug and play. And that's kind of how the tech platform's set up. So, and then the Web 2.5 stuff, same deal. I mean, this is the benefit, honestly, of Faraway having all this like Web3 tech is, account creation, super simple. Single click, non-custodial wallet, super easy. Checking people's wallets for NFTs to give them the score in game, super simple, already done. UGC component layer, already built in Mini Royale, just plugged it right into Dookie Dash. So it's like all this stuff sounds crazy, but like it's been built over the past 3 years for this purpose, and that's kind of the idea. Is you just it's Legos,
Nice.
So that's the value of having that first party dev too,
Just like Legos, huh? A little more complicated than Legos, but sure. Take the analogy. Question on monetization. We haven't actually spoken about that. What are the kind of monetization paths here?
Yep.
Is it a free to play with in-app purchases, which presumably is the kind of the only thing you can do on Apple and Google? Is there anything that lives outside of the mobile experience where you can monetize some of these whales, some of these maybe token holders? Talk to us more about how you expect this game to make you money, especially if you're giving away $1 million prize pools. It needs to make at least some money to pay for itself.
In-app monetization, absolutely a thing. So we've got consumable buffs that you can buy. Pretty standard fare for like an infinite runner, right? And also very similar to what we did with the first Dookie Dash. And the good news there is yet again, if the motivation's strong enough, and I think this is something that maybe people don't realize, if the motivation's really strong and you have what is in effect an infinite monetization apparatus, which is what consumables are, especially if they're run-based, you've got an opportunity to monetize like effectively infinitely until the end of the season. So the structure of the events, the way it's score-based, the way it's your top best score, and you want to burn these things every run to have your best shot for that one time that you nail your top score of getting the best score, but you're constantly like trying to be one-upped by other people, and therefore you have to push yourself yet again. It creates that loop. So I think that's a pretty effective monetization strategy. But in addition to that, we also have content that we're going to be able to sell, skins, avatars, stuff like that. As I mentioned, we have that arcade mode that opens up a whole bunch of different monetization opportunities that don't affect the skill gameplay at all. but do affect kind of like your typical, free to play, like meta mechanics and stuff like that. There's a player profile customizations there. So there's a lot of like in-game stuff, definitely. I think out of game, not specific to this game for obvious reasons. I think, we're not going to flirt with disaster on our maiden voyage. So it's not, that's not really in the cards. But to my earlier point, I do believe in this concept of collateralized LTV. And so there is a reason for the interoperability of content, because what we will do is we will incentivize people to play these other games with the content that they own or have purchased or bought or created from Dookie Dash. And by doing that, then we can get them into those degen experiences that I mentioned before, or we can add them into like Web 2.5 stuff that's not targeting mobile. Maybe it's just PC, maybe Epic Store, etc. And there we've now got this effective funnel, right? Because like if I pay whatever $1 for a player in Dookie Dash, and my conversion rate is even low, maybe like 10% of the population that gets into the rest of the ecosystem, that 10% might disproportionately spend in other experiences, and therefore now the kind of like ecosystem LTV is significantly greater than the cost of acquisition, and the math works, and you've got that yield and that CAC ratio that makes a ton of sense. And so like that's the play here is like, yes, I want that game to be really effectively monetized, but I also don't want to do anything that's going to like damage its retention or its kind of placement on the app store as a front funnel, to the rest of the ecosystem. And then we're going to optimize and try and maximize LTV through that mechanism I described.
Talking about retention actually, and other metrics, how much can you share? You mentioned that the game's been in closed beta or in the Philippines. I think you just mentioned that opened up to Australia recently. I know your global release was set to be May, but it sounds like that's going to be pushed out to July. Totally understandable. That's game dev for you, game dev 101. Yep. So these metrics that you're tracking, what are you tracking? Is it your standard kind of free to play game metrics, or is there some extra layer for the Web3 component, the token holder? I don't know how many token holders are in the Philippines or Australia, but it's probably not thousands. So is there a way to measure this collateralized LTV component that you mentioned, which by the way is a nice term? I think you may have you coined that term? Is that I haven't heard it before, so.
Yeah, I came up with it before. I've been thinking about this stuff.
Collateralized LTV.
Time. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So talk a little bit about the metrics. What can you share? What's working, what's not? If you can talk about that as well. The fact that you're pushing out to July implies that there's some more polishing needs to go on, of course, and that's normal. What's working and what needs more work?
Yeah. So I can't get into specific KPIs for obvious reasons, but what I can say is that like initially we're focused on sort of the UA. Well, I guess technical stability. Right, that was the first thing. Mm-hmm. So making sure that the game stood up, didn't crash, that kind of stuff. Then it was like prepping the UA funnel, getting ad creative created, putting all the kind of telemetry in place, all the SDKs from the ad affiliates. Like we're working with a company called Superfine.
I'm familiar with those guys.
Yeah. So they're doing a lot of the UA right now. So we're like iterating back and forth, but we haven't really spent that much money. The CPIs are looking pretty decent. And really now we're going to start to focus on like retention. So that's kind of the main area of attention right now. And we've got a build in the works that should be introducing that stuff I mentioned before, like the Fatui and kind of the arcade mode. And that's like the next key thing. And my hope is that, we're going to hit the target that I want to hit, right? Which is the day one of like north of 50%, with a strong kind of like day over day sort of clip off. And then once we have that, we'll go live. But I do think there's this factor of like part of the game, and this is the part I'm kind of oddly not sure what to do with. I think like once we put it out there, kind of like Dookie Dash 1, a large part of the stickiness of the game is going to be related to this like value proposition, the monetary incentive, and kind of format. And so who knows what that does to the KPI profile, but if it's anything like Dookie Dash, it might be a force multiplier, which I would love to see. So it's a question of like, how much do we optimize over how much time before we run that first season. So I think that's why I say July. It's like at some point you make a decision and you want to kind of just like roll it out and see what sort of force multiplier value is added on top as a byproduct of running the actual season. Because right now we can't do that, obviously, until the game fully launches. But I mean, tech-wise, KPI is looking good. We're still building more telemetry in. I'm not doing as sophisticated stuff as I'm used to, segmentation, multivariate testing, that kind of stuff yet. So we still need to get some more telemetry in. But yeah, it's really, I mean, it's so far so good. And looking to hopefully get this thing out in the relatively, at least in game dev terms, near future. So
yeah. Well, good luck with that. I mean, I think the TLDR, if I'm taking anything away from this, is the wild card is the prize, right? The $1 million prize, and that's the thing that this is gonna hinge on in many ways, because Infinite Runners don't monetize particularly well. They're casual games. Obviously, if you've got massive scale like Subway Surfers, then yes, you can make some money. But those days are long gone where you can grow to the scale of Subway Surfers on the back of a very casual, hyper casual game like Infinite Runners. So I wish you good luck when you put it out there. I think it'll be a hearts in your throats kind of moment. I'm presuming when you put it out there in July, hopefully July, and announce the prize pool and watch the streamers and the gamers and the esports fanatics and the casual players too, who think they can win and compete, watch that flood of users come in. So it'll be either a very exciting moment and it'll validate a lot of the theory or the thesis behind this, or there might be more work too. But anyway, I hope for the former, of course, and I'm sure you do too. One big question I had, which I didn't ask earlier, but I'm going to ask it now anyway, because I think it is highly relevant. What has the community reaction been? I mean, one of the things that everybody knows about Web3 in general, and of course Bored Apes in particular, is that they are truly, truly fanatical about their club, right? It's their exclusive club, and they bought into it, and they are proud of that fact. You briefly mentioned that you've been trying to balance the community thing, and it's been positive, I think, is kind of what I took away from it. But you must have been nervous about kind of messing, so to speak, in the minds of some, I'm sure, with this beloved IP that is truly a part of the personalities of these holders.
Yeah. So I think one, the response has been unanimously positive. So it's, they love it. They're always, I get DM'd literally daily when Dookie Dash Unclogged. So it's a thing. I mean, because it really was a moment. I think the whole experience just was a big kind of cultural thing for the Bored Ape community. And they missed it. And the reality is I'd also get asked all the time when Dookie Dash relaunch, just so we can play it. I had that all the time. It's just just put it up. It doesn't matter if there's an incentive there. We just want to play the game, which is obviously a good sign from a retention standpoint. But the irony is they didn't know, and we didn't talk about it. We were building it, and we were going to launch this Dookie Dash Unclogged game. So the buildup of that demand was kind of funny to see from the inside, because it's it's coming, and you're going to announce it. And the cool thing with this game, and the fact it's cross-platform also, is that we're able to do IRL events. So we did Paris, Dubai. Once the game's live, we might even have think of it as a LAN party type situation where you stand this thing up and you've got a bunch of people directly competing, maybe for merch, in real time. So it's not just the game itself at a scalable kind of persistent state. It's also standing it up at Ape Fest or whatever event, or this place, that place, whatever. Maybe doing it for partners at their events. Who knows? So I think the community has just been really enthusiastic to play it more. We ran a big, huge beta with a mutant ape as the top prize, and that went over really well too. So I think overall it's as positive as you could possibly imagine. So no concern on my end. on the community front.
Nice. And you mentioned a follow-up question here. You mentioned that you're hoping to activate some of the kind of more famous slash influencer slash engaged apes in the community to hopefully give you that extra oomph on the collateralized LTV, spread the word more broadly. How are you planning on doing that? I'm not asking you to mention individuals, of course, but how big is this network of highly influential apes that you're hoping to activate for this purpose?
Yeah, I mean there are quite a few, and the community is pretty strong. And the really cool thing is it's not like you'd be surprised. Like a lot of these people just do it because they like the community. It's like really, it's not a paid thing. It's just like they want to be part of it because it's part of their kind of club. And we've seen that numerous times, and we see it even now. Like, I mean, even, working with Sway, just flew him out to France. We made him an avatar and a bike, and like he was cool, and he's been streaming it, and it was great. So it's like that kind of stuff is pretty. One of the cooler things about the yacht club is just like the networking and kind of like the passion behind supporting stuff within the ecosystem and within the community.
That's great to hear. Well, we are coming up to time here. We have covered a lot of ground. Obviously, we had a lot of ground to cover, and there was plenty more things I could ask you about. But I'll throw it over to you. Are there any parting thoughts on what you'd like to call out? What comes next other than the July launch? What does the post-launch roadmap look like? Anything at all that we haven't touched on here yet today?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot.
We have. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. So nothing really jumps to mind, but I think like, yeah, my parting, I guess, thoughts are, yeah, it's ambitious. The roadmap's ambitious. We're doing a lot at both companies, at Yuga and at Faraway. But I think, the benefit here is this idea of like this concept of like an ecosystem, and sort of dividing and conquering, and then using sort of effective work done in different places to reinforce and sort of like level up the new stuff that you're doing. So we'll see, what the future holds, but I am very bullish overall. And I think we've seen like a return, at least of crypto. And I think like, Web3 gaming is going to have its time when people realize the opportunity there. And it's one of those things where, at least in my opinion, it's easy to argue against it if you're working in a traditional free-to-play business. But when somebody breaks the seal and achieves exit velocity, as we all know, the entire industry is going to follow suit. And that first mover advantage in that position, especially when you think about it in the context of this collateralization of LTV and network infrastructure and sort of like how all these things tie together, you're going to have a real hard time breaking in after that. So yeah, it's that's the play. This is not a small play, but I am confident that it is an interesting one. And if you're going to do anything in an industry as super optimized as gaming is at this point, it has to be something pretty novel. And so that's the game that we're going for.
Yeah, I mean, wildly ambitious. I love it. Good luck with it. You kind of want to be the Subway Surfers in 2024 that captures the collateral's LTV, as they were to early to, them and the Tomb Raider-y one, the one where you're
Temple Run.
Temple Run. Thank you. Yes, yeah. I was blanking on that. Yeah, you kind of want to be early. Yeah. Because that way you do capture the infinite runner. I remember Zynga was working on it. It was a really good game, actually. It was co-founder of mine, Justin, on a previous company. He was the design director on that. It was Running with Friends. And it was a really great game, but it was way too late to mobile. Sadly, it just never reached that escape velocity that we talked about. So yeah, you do need to be early. And once you get that, you get going, and it's really hard to unseat. So yeah, good luck with that. Final question I ask all of our guests, favorite 3 games that you're either playing or are excited by? Could be Web 2, could be Web 3, could be mobile, could be PC, could be anything.
Sure. So I am getting back into EVE Online. I've just started playing Last Epoch, curious to see what that trade system's like. Whole bunch of mobile games, and I'm looking forward to like the Elden Ring update. So I'm kind of like all over the place,
Well,
different genres, different platforms.
Different genres. I mean, maybe this is exactly right for you guys. And at Faraway, you can be a master of lots of genres. Or are you a master of one or a jack of all trades?
I'd say I have definitely I have some skill sets that I'd say are like genre agnostic, definitely, especially on the product side. But when it comes to design, I'm probably more a mid-core like RPG guy.
Got it. All right. Well, perfect place to end. Thank you so much for coming on the pod again. Spencer, you're welcome back anytime. I'm very, very eager to have you back once you guys launched and you have some metrics to share. And, maybe that first $1 million prize pool has been won by somebody. And we can kind of talk about how that all went down and hopefully look back at the success of the game. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
And as always, a big thank you to all of our listeners. We'll be back next week with more interviews, more insights, and more analysis from the weird and wonderful world of Web3. So until next time, friends, stay crypto curious and feel free to send questions, guest recommendations, and comments to me. My email is niko@naavik.co.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.